Rama, it's all yours.
Okay, so we typically begin these sessions with 10 minutes of input from the public on other subjects, I guess, or on any subject. And so I'm going to open up the floor for that. And I think that Keith wanted to go first. So he had 3 minutes and 40 seconds. He wanted to present about Ward 8 and people taking his name in vain at the last meeting.
Thank you very much, Rama. I wanted to kind of talk about what you were talking about well, Ward 8 and me. My wife and I have lived on University Terrace for 47 years. I have been the ward clerk in Ward 8 since 2015. There are some statistics about Ward 8 voting taken from the city's website, verified by the tabulator list. Ward 8's number of registered voters is not much lower than the average of the registered voters in the 7 other wards. Its voter participation, however, is significantly lower than the rest of the city, ranging from 4% participation March 7th, 2018 to 29% November 3rd, 2020. Ward 8's town meeting participation is an average of about 15% compared to an average of 33% in the other 7 wards. UVM is not in session on town meeting day. On March 2nd, 2021, the assistant election workers registered 229 new voters in Ward 8. The 837 votes cast in that election was the lowest number of votes cast in all wards at 21%. Ward 8 has had the largest number of mailed ballots returned with addresses unknown. For the December 2021 election, over 1,800 ballots that have been mailed back returned because of addressee unknown. Ward 8 consists of college campus residents south of Main Street who comprise the majority of Ward 8 residents, approximately 4,250 according to UVM. There is no neighborhood connection between the majority of voters in the ward and the rest of the ward. University Terrace is isolated in Ward 8, even though it is contiguous with Robinson Parkway in Ward 6. University Terrace has the most owner-occupied homes and long-term renters on a street in the ward. Locating 30 registered voters to sign a candidate's petition is difficult because so few off-campus students are registered. UVM limits non-student candidates' access to students on campus. The number of long-term renters and homeowners is too small to be relied on for the 30 signatures. Going door to door annually, many students have told me that they prefer to vote in their hometowns. A large number of student senators in January 2020, when I talked with them, were not registered to vote in Burlington. The majority of Ward 8 student voters do not vote in Burlington, but those that do easily outnumber the Ward 8 long-term renters and homeowners. Recruiting election workers is difficult. A large majority of those working at the polls live outside of the ward and are unfamiliar with our ward boundaries, the 3 legislative district boundaries in our ward, and the campus area in our ward. In addition to a large number of voter registration forms, a large number of changes of address forms are needed by the voter registration board before we can put the student on their checklist so that they can vote. There is a trend that students who get elected as inspector of elections are unable to complete their term. If you want my recommendation, I am supporting 2 city councilors and 2 school commissioners in 7 equally populated wards. I think the student population at UVM and Champlain College should be divided equally among the many wards. Thank you.
Thank you, Keith. I think you wanted to go next, Leah. Is that correct?
Maybe after
Yeah,
we switch to the room and then switch back so everybody gets a chance to speak. Okay.
Yeah, I agree. I was really interested in that data because some years ago, I did similar data analysis of all of the wards because I was very curious about the fact that, for example, wards 2, 3, it was so much easier for a person to campaign in those wards because there were so many fewer registered voters. So I want to make people aware. I mean, I'm sure this group is aware, but census data counts everybody. It doesn't just count registered voters. It counts everybody, including babies and non-citizens, people that are just here for a few years to go to the university. Everybody is counted. So those numbers become difficult to work with because those 1,800 ballots that came back that said no address, those people got ballots because they were registered voters in that ward, but they had since moved on. And this happens every year. So that's why you get a very low percentage of registered voters voting in that ward as compared to, for example, I live in Ward 4. By the way, I didn't introduce myself. My name is Lee Terhune. I'm the alternate Ad Hoc Committee member from Ward 4. So that we seem to have a large percentage of voters, of registered voters who turn out at the polls, but that's because we don't have a very transient population. And so we don't have 1,800 people on our registration roll that in fact don't live here anymore. I was really interested in that data and wanted to compare it to what I did, a similar analysis about 8 years ago. And I asked Keith to send it to me, and he refused to send it to me. I was really upset by that. He said that I could be a UVM student or a realtor, or, I mean, he named all these things that if I was any of those things, I wasn't entitled to look at this data. So I therefore objected to it being interjected into the discussion tonight because it's very biased and prejudicial against decisions that this committee has to make. And it also can trigger bias in people that are here to testify. So that's why I objected to taking some sort of public comment before the hearing began. But now we've begun, and I thank you very much for the time.
Thank you, Leah. So do you want to take it back to the room, whoever is in charge there? We're not able to hear.
Sorry. We can hear you.
There you go.
All right. Are we live on Zoom now?
Yep.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so I'll start over. I'm Jeff Comstock, participating as a resident of Ward 7, and a couple of overarching comments is I like having 2 councilors and 2 school board members. So whether that configuration going forward is in the current ward and district structure, or each ward getting two representatives for those separate bodies, I favor 2 councilors per ward. And part of the reason for that is one is that I appreciate having some options in terms of distributing my representation between the people that serve on the school board and the city council, because there's always no guarantee that I'm going to get along with who actually gets elected or feel adequately represented by them. But say the current, in the current situation of feeling like I get to vote for 2 people that represent me, feels like there's more of an opportunity to actually communicate, have a voice with folks serving on the school board and city council. My second major point is that neighborhoods and district representation is valuable and critical because both for the residents who live here and for the people who serve on those bodies, to have appreciation for and understand the neighborhoods and the communities that they serve. And again, going back to the idea of providing opportunity for more direct communication with our between elected officials and the residents. And so with that said, as my approach, I know that there is a concept of citywide or at-large counselors and school board members. And for me, that would be an absolute non-starter because it essentially violates any of the beneficial conditions that I talked about in terms of having two people that I feel that represent me on those. Yeah. So I'm going to leave it at that. I also have some thoughts about the college student representation, but I think Keith covered that fairly well, so I will not go into that at this point. Thank you.
Maybe we should, I think we've been doing the pre input session for 10 minutes now. So maybe we should go, I think the next thing that we should do is to go around and people on the committee can introduce themselves. And then I'll talk about what the process that we're using here is. And then we're going to turn the podium over to Dan, who is, I believe, the city attorney, who's going to explain more about what is involved in the redistricting process.
Let me just interject a quick sec and say that everyone will have an opportunity to speak. Don't feel like we're cutting you off. We're not. We're going to have a larger discussion about redistricting. So you'll have plenty of time once we finish these presentations. So just want to say that.
Yes, thank you for clarifying that. So I'll go first. Introductions.
Can people who are speaking show their face when they're speaking?
If you're able to have enough bandwidth to do it, we'd love you to do that.
Well, who's speaking right now? I have no idea.
Oh,
It's up there.
yeah, I should be there at the very top.
She's at the podium.
Oh, okay, I see you. Okay, thank you. Thank
Okay.
you. Sorry.
I'll
Say your name.
name.
People should say
Right.
their names.
Yes, say your name when you speak. So I'm Rama Coach for Lakota. I am the Ward 6 representative on the Ad Hoc Committee on redistricting. I've been living in Burlington for 21 years. I'm going to go around the faces I can see from the committee who are not on the room, who are sort of on Zoom, and then people who are actually at the Miller Center after that can introduce themselves. So first person I see is Daniel. I can't.
Hey.
I'm not seeing.
Hello, everyone. My name is Daniel Montano. I'm a graduate student at UVM. I've lived in Burlington for a year and a half, and I am on the Ad Hoc Committee from Ward number 3.
Thank you. Robert.
Me, okay, I thought, I'm both here in the Miller Center and online. I'm Robert
Okay.
Bristow Johnson, and I am the Ward 7 representative.
Anne. Brandon?
Hi, I'm Anne Brenya. I am representing.
Okay, we'll do it. I'm Robert Bristow Johnson, and I'm the Ward 7 representative. That's all I wanted to say.
Okay.
I'm Anne Brenya, representing Ward 8. I live on Bradley Street, where I've lived since 2001. I've lived in Burlington since 1994.
Okay. Linda, are you on the committee? Hello.
She's not. Linda's not.
Okay. And Leah, you introduced yourself as an alternate. Want to say more?
Alternate Ward 4, Burlington since 1967, UVM student who decided to raise my children here in this wonderful place. Ward 4, alternate.
Okay. That's all I'm seeing on Zoom. If people want to,
Why don't you could ask committee members to raise their hand.
oh, that's a clever
We'll have
idea.
people line up. So Richard.
Richard Hilliard, Ward 1. I've lived in Burlington for 26 years and I've never been a student.
George Love, representative for Ward 2. I've lived in Burlington for 6 years and in the Old North End for the last 3.
Jim Holloway, Ward 4, been here for 33 years.
Greg Scheffler, Ward 5. I've been in Vermont for about 50 years as a student at Vermont Law School. Been in Burlington for 20 years. I'm a retired high school history teacher, and I was married in the treehouse at Oak Ledge Park.
Anybody else in the room? No. Good. Rama, back to you.
Okay, I'm going to quickly go through what the process is that we're following for the redistricting and what the role of the ad hoc committee is. So the ad hoc committee was created by City Council, and our goal is, and our charter is to solicit input from the community at large and to find out what people want in terms of redistricting. Redistricting is something that happens every 10 years in response to the census, or it can happen every 10 years in response to the census. If it is found that the census districts are out of alignment in terms of how big they are, they're supposed to be within 10% of each other in population. So our committee is going to solicit this input, and we will present a report to City Council. City Council will then take that input and formulate a proposal for new districts, which will be put on the ballot in November of 2022, I believe. And then if that is approved, the information will be passed on to the state legislature and they will make the actual approval. Burlington, unlike most cities in Vermont, I think maybe unlike all cities in Vermont, has the boundaries of its districts set as part of the city charter, which is why we have to go through the folks in Montpelier to have the change made. That was quick. I think that Dan is going to go into more detail about what is involved and why we are doing this. So I think is it appropriate for me to pass this back to Miller Center now, and Dan is going to speak.
Thanks, we're on it.
Okay.
Dan Richardson, City Attorney.
Okay, thank you, everyone. My name is Dan Richardson. I am the city attorney for Burlington, and I am once again happy to be with all of you talking about our mutual favorite topic of redistricting. Actually, I want to pick up on a point that Rama stated at the end of his comments, which was how the charter system works. And I was actually talking with Sarah Carpenter about this earlier. So the way Burlington's charter works is the districts are set in very detailed descriptions within the city charter. So anytime you want to change the charter, the districts as a city, you have to go and change the charter, which requires a legislative fix. There are other models, and the city of Montpelier is a good example in that the city of Montpelier's charter sets out 3 districts and then leaves it to the city council to draw the boundaries subject to a popular vote of the citizens of the city. So there are certain differences in these things. Burlington's unique in a lot of ways because in Vermont, there are only a few cities that actually have this kind of proportional representation where you divide the city into these districts and units and wards for representation. Most of Vermont is governed at the local level by a select board, which is an at-large body. So for example, our neighbors to the east and South Burlington are governed by a select board, which means if you're a voter in South Burlington, you vote for every single select board member. But no single select board member represents perhaps your enclave or neighborhood within the city of Burlington as different than any other neighborhood or enclave in the city of South Burlington. It's all one at-large district. So Burlington, I believe Rutland and Montpelier, and I think Newport have the ward system that they've adopted, where you do have this proportional representation, which does require us to do redistricting, which brings me to my first slide. The Constitution provides that a census every 10 years determines the distribution of House of Representatives seats. Each state gets one House seat plus additional based on population. This is what's known as apportionment. Each state must then adjust its voting districts to elect the number of seats allotted, creating or changing geographic subdivisions, or to have relatively equal sized populations. This is known as redistricting. And these are just some of the terms of apportionment and redistricting that are key in the redistricting process. The same principles that we see at the national level apply at each level of government, including the city of Burlington, because you have this proportional representation. Currently, all of Vermont, if we look, it's very easy at the federal level. We have one House district currently occupied by Representative Peter Welch. That will remain the same forever because Vermont is such a small population. We will never gain a second House seat in comparison to the rest of the country unless there's a mass migration to the state. So that's never an issue. Obviously, at the state level, they're going through this process of just trying to figure out how do we draw the districts. You've probably seen some of the data and information about that. The big controversial change is that they're trying to, or the change that they're trying to make that has drawn some controversy, is they're going from multi-member House districts to single-member House districts in their proposed plan. But just like this citizen board that's thinking about things, thinking about ideas, that redistricting board is just, it's like a little bit more than the citizen board in that they draw up a plan and they give it to the legislature, and the legislature is going to do what they're going to do, which may include that plan, and it may be something completely different. Vermont, 7 Vermont House districts in Burlington since 2014. Burlington has 8 boards and 4 districts for local elected offices. So you created this district and ward system about 6 years ago. And the question that is before you today is whether or not you want to keep that system and make some boundary line adjustments, or whether you want to re-envision the system in some ways. And that's part of what's the feedback we're selecting. Here are some traditional redistricting factors. I've divided them into the must-haves and the should-haves. Must-have, 1 person, 1 vote, required by the 14th Amendment. Populations of each district, as Rama pointed out, have to be nearly equal to every other district as practicable, with deviations of less than 10%. Contiguity of territory. 1 part of a district cannot be physically separated or detached from the other parts. There may not be a north and south Ward 8. There has to be 1 single Ward 8. It can, even if it's just a street, it still has to be connected. You cannot separate on the basis of race, ethnicity, or religion. Those are verboten categories, and you may not make any determinations on those categories, as well as other protected classes. Should-haves, maintaining existing political subdivision lines. Always a good thing because those worked at one point or another. Honoring natural or historical boundary lines. If the neighborhoods have, if there's, for example, the Intervale, that is a big non-voting block of land that separates certain neighborhoods. Honoring that is probably a good thing. Compactness. I think some of the criticism and of course the gerrymander or gerrymander, depending on how you choose to pronounce it, is of course parodied because it looks like this creature, because it's not a compact, nice district. The law favors compact districts, but obviously doesn't require them to exist that way. Respect for communities of interest. And that's different. And we've gotten questions as to, wait a minute, I thought you said we couldn't make a separation on the basis of race, ethnicity, or religion. And it's not. And communities of interest are not necessarily defined. There's the concept that you know, if there is a community of interest that is worth respecting or considering in some way, any type of redistricting plan, it would favor taking that taking that community into account in one way or the other. That might mean putting them in one district. That might mean making sure that they're not packed into a particular district. It may, but again, these are the should-haves. Providing small districts and meaningful representation. One of the reasons why I think Burlington went to the ward and district system is because it wanted to make sure, could you imagine if all of your city councilors were elected citywide? You probably wouldn't have the same type of relationship that you do with your individual ward or district city councilor. And that's why cities above a certain population do tend to go into this division of different voting districts. Use of census blocks, grouping of houses and apartment buildings, are smallest unit of that the census uses. Obviously, we want to follow that. That's a recommendation. Okay, historically, in 2010, Burlington used the following criteria on the left side. I'm not going to read through all of them, but it just gives you a sense about things that when we looked at the historic record, when I was going back, these were things that were important and held to be important for the criteria when they were doing this the last time. Some of these things obviously were followed. Some of these things were obviously not followed. So for example, academic institutions should be more than one ward. Ward size matters for citizen communication campaigning. Relationship to state districts is obviously something that is not quite followed. And part of it is, that may or may not be important. That's certainly from an insider point of view, as somebody who helps the city run its processes, the more these city council districts look like the state districts, the easier it is to run an election because you don't have to print out multiple ballots. But practically speaking, for you as citizens and voters, that may not be a priority or a care, and there may be more important cares that you want to push forward. So I've added some additional potential considerations for 2021, and they all have question marks, not because, not because I expect you to answer them tonight, but they are the questions, and they are the things that you as people thinking about these issues probably want to consider. Do you want to preserve incumbency? Do you want to keep the current number of wards? Do you want to keep the district system? We've already heard public comment in favor of, one of the benefits of the district system, that it ensures that you have double number of city councilors reporting to you as an individual voter. But we've heard other comments where people are saying, well, districts are a little bit large and they're hard to run, as opposed to a city councilor from a ward who has the same thing. All right, even or odd number at large. Okay, moving on, as we can see, the various census maps and how things have changed with the wards and with the populations from 1990 to 2010. I'm going to go forward. Okay, I'm going to go through this very quickly. This is the redistricting process detailed, or everything you always wanted to ask about redistricting, but were afraid to ask. Determine the need for a charter change. We've done that. We need it because the population has changed. It's grown. Current ad hoc redistricting committee meetings, that's where we are right now. You're getting feedback and information, giving this kind of data for the city councilors to consider. But number 3, city council develops, improves redistricting plan. That's where they draw the maps. That's where the rubber hits the road. Followed by that, you get some public hearings and you get a public warning, letting everybody know, letting everybody get feedback. November of 2022 is when it's going to go to the voters, as we plan right now. And then it goes to the House and Senate to be voted upon, scrutinized, and debated. Following their approval, hopefully, we get governor's approval, and then you have new voting districts. And that is really redistricting in a nutshell. So thank you all very much for listening, and I'm going to turn it over to the very capable hands of our new city planner.
Okay, I will be really quick, just to tee us up in terms of helping elaborate on the point that Dan shared about why redistricting is necessary. So we have received the apportionment data that Dan referred to from the Census Bureau, which contains some of the basic data points about our city's population in 2020 that we need to consider the question about redistricting. So to share a few of those highlights with you, here is some information about the city's population on the whole. So currently in 2020, our population is just under 45,000 at 44,743. And that represents a 5% growth from the 2010 census. So you can see some information about past census data for the city. And there's also a link here in the slides that will be posted online if you'd like to look at data about other communities in Vermont. When we're talking about redistricting, of course, what we care about is how this population breaks down at the ward level. And this map shows our current wards, and the chart here shows the change in population from 2010 to 2020 for each of the city's wards. You can see that most of the wards in the city did experience some population growth, except for wards 3 and 7, which remained fairly flat from the last census. Both Rama and Dan mentioned that one of the key things that we look at when considering whether our wards are roughly the same size is this term of kind of ideal size or deviation. So what that means is that we take the citywide population and divide it by the number of wards, and that's our target ward size or our ideal size, which in this case is about 5,600 people. So this chart shows how each of the wards' populations compare to that ideal size. And we're really looking to make sure that each of the wards is within 10% plus or minus of that ideal size. So you can see that Ward 1 is our most populous ward, and it is actually a little bit more than 10% larger than the ideal size. It's about 11, I want to say it's 11.5% larger. And you can also see that Ward 7 is our least populous ward, and it is about 9.5% smaller than the ideal size. So one of the other factors that we look at then is what is the difference between the largest and the smallest ward? That's another factor that we take into consideration. And you can see that the difference between Ward 1 and Ward 7 is also more than 10%. So we have two factors that are really driving this reconsideration of the population. One of the other questions that we have received in one of our past meetings was just, what about the districts? And while none of the individual districts, we have 4 districts, exceed the 10% plus or minus the ideal on their own, there is more than 10% difference between the largest and smallest district. So really our population has shifted in a way that is, you know, calling into question our voting districts at every level. I think the other thing that I just wanted to mention here is that when Dan shared these maps, they are also in the back of the room. You can see more closely the difference between the most previous ward plan that you have from the voting districts that we have today. That was based on the 1990 census. Our ward population did not require us, or I'm sorry, our census population did not require us to redistrict after the 2000 census. So that was the ward plan that was in place from the mid 90s until early 90s until 2015 when you adopted the current ward plan. So I think that's all I have to add actually beyond what Dan shared, and I'll turn it back over to Diane and the committee to walk through the discussion.
Great. Thank you. Oh, this is you. Okay, that's one more thing I'll get to. Hello, everyone. This is Diane Meyerhoff. We've actually completed sort of the presentation part of our discussion tonight. We promised we'd have time for folks to give us their opinions, their thoughts to the committee. This is our listening session. So Rama, would you help me? And perhaps you could do the online. I think we had a number of people with their hands up, and I wondered if maybe they wanted to give us their thoughts. Yeah, why don't we do that for now? Yeah, there you are, Rama. Thank you. Are there folks? I see some hands up. John Chapel Sokol, you're muted. There you go. Hi there.
Hi, thank you. So can I talk about two different things? One's really short.
You can talk about anything you'd like.
Oh, thank you. I want to just I want to just say one thing that I just noticed on Megan's chart on the population by ward, that honoring the natural boundary of the new North End will mean that wards 4 and 7, or whatever those get mixed to be, are always going to be lower populations than the other wards, because there's just fewer people up there. And so they will naturally there will be a bias towards representation up there if we honor the boundaries. I just thought that was interesting. What I really want to talk about, and Jeff Comstock talked about it earlier, and I completely agree with his concerns, and I want to offer an alternative solution or alternative way of thinking about it. My concern is I want my city councilors as representatives of my wards, not just to listen to me, but also really represent the needs of my ward. And I think that as structured, most of the city councilors are looking citywide at what they're doing. And that's wonderful, but it means that my local needs are not necessarily being represented. What I would propose is a structure where there are ward city councilors, and then there are at-large city councilors as well. So maybe there would be 7 or 9 wards, and then add 4 at-large. The at-large city councilors can think about the whole city, but what it will do is it will force the ward city councilors to focus on their individual wards. I did a very small poll of my city councilors and asked them what they thought the most important priorities for their ward was. And I liked the answers, but I didn't love them. And what I heard was that they basically understood the needs of the wards from campaigning. And that's fine, but campaigning it's just not frequent enough. They need to understand the needs of the wards by knowing the people in the wards on a regular basis. So I want to try to focus the concerns of the city councilors directly onto the ward. And I think one way of doing it would be to take some of these city councilors and make them at large, let them worry about the bigger pictures, and then have enough individual ward representatives so that they actually think the ward is their most important mission. One other quick comment on that. One of the concerns I've heard about at large is the difficulty in campaigning. And I understand that, but at this stage, so much campaigning is being done by parties, not by individuals. And that doesn't make it, that doesn't sound like a valid argument that campaigning would be hard, because the parties are basically doing it. And maybe what it would do is it would incent more independents to be running locally, because they're really trying to connect with the people in their community rather than connecting through their party. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, John. And I see Linda, you have your hand up, and then Lee. Anyone else, please put your hand up. I can see all of you, so we can hopefully go work our way through Earhart's after that. So Lee's next. Lee, you have to unmute yourself.
Are you saying Lee?
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry.
A clarification on the presentation was just done. Did I hear correctly that you said there was no redistricting done after the 2000 census?
Yes, that's true.
Because didn't we do redistricting after the 2000 census?
No, we did not.
No.
No.
Not at the municipal level.
Wait. Just say.
It's 2010 that we did it.
Dan's gonna come and
Sorry, I was just going to add, certainly we did it at the state level every 10 years, but my understanding is that in 2000, at the municipal level, the districts didn't, or the wards didn't require redistricting. The population hadn't shifted enough. It wasn't until 2010 that it had to be redone.
Okay, I guess my confusion was it showed 1992 and it showed 2021, and what was in between there was the last redistricting we did like 8 years ago. Okay, so speaking as a private citizen, as a resident, I'm very much in favor of Jeff Comstock's idea of 2 counselors per ward, and very much opposed to district counselors because they are representing such a large area, and it's going to encourage them running like the mayor with slick ads and TV and all of that. And we're not going to have the face-to-face, door-to-door personal contact that we have had with our counselors. My experience is very different from the last person who spoke. My counselors, who are Ali Jiang, Mark Barlow, and Sarah Carpenter, are very tuned in to the wards. They come to all the NPA meetings. They email back and forth with residents. They very much represent us on the ward level, and we appreciate that very much. Previous to that, we had 2 counselors per ward with 7 wards. We had people representing 2 different parties. It was really great because people in Ward 4 felt represented because we had 2 different kinds of counselors. We don't have parties running campaigns in Ward 4. I don't know what ward the previous speaker was from, but I can say we don't have parties running campaigns. In fact, 2 of our counselors are independent, I'm pretty sure. Ali Jiang and Mark Barlow. So we don't, yeah, thank you very much, Robert. So we don't have a big party push here. We like to keep it local, and we are most likely to keep it local if we have smaller wards with, in Burlington, 2 counselors per ward. I also want to speak to the workload of city councilors. Since we had 7 wards and 2 counselors per ward, we shrunk it down from 14 to 12. And then we added another standing committee, and we added another city department. And I attend a lot of city meetings because I'm just interested in what's going on. And the amount of time that I see city councilors at meetings till 9, 10, 11 o'clock at night, they're sitting on several committees. Their committees are very active. 15 years ago, the committees weren't that active. It wasn't unusual for a standing committee to not meet for 4 months because they didn't have anything to do. That isn't the way it is today. We have very active, hardworking standing committees. And we've got to think about, if we keep shrinking council, we're going to get less output from our city councilors. And I don't want that. I like representative democracy. I think the more the better. I like the small districts that the state has proposed to Burlington. I hope that we follow through on that. I don't like the district system. And by the way, I don't think Jeff Comstock was speaking in favor of the district system, or maybe I misheard him, and maybe he'll clarify that. So thanks, everybody. Thanks.
Thank you, Lee. Linda.
Hi, good evening. My name is Linda Risby. I've been a Burlington resident for over 30 years, and I live in Ward 8. And I'm basically reading from my comments on redistricting that I made at our MPA meeting last month. My first comment is that the redistricted map should not be gerrymandered. In general, there are principles of proper redistricting to avoid gerrymandering, which are available to read and learn about, and these principles should be adhered to. More than one of them have relevance for Ward 8. One that I'd like to address here is called compactness, which was mentioned earlier. Individual districts should be compact in appearance without wing-like protrusions on a map. Wings are an excellent indicator of gerrymandering. If you look at a map of Ward 8, you see that it is nothing if not a wing. This should be addressed with the new map by changing the boundaries for Ward 8 or eliminating Ward 8 altogether. Another point relevant for ward construction that came to my attention when I was on the MPA steering committee, and Keith alluded to it earlier, is that UVM limits access to the campus if you're not a student or otherwise affiliated with the university, and that's understandable. However, what it means is that for contested races in Ward 8, in comparison to a candidate who does have an affiliation with UVM, a non-affiliated candidate is at a deep structural disadvantage. That's because the student population studying and often living on campus is such a large proportion of our voter base, and that voter base is not so accessible for direct grassroots campaigning by any candidate not affiliated with the university. I think that's basically undemocratic with a small d and needs to be corrected with redistricting. Do I have a minute to close? I just close by saying those are only two of the reasons that I think that Ward 8 is problematic. I hope the committee will consider a broad range of changes to the current ward structure, including eliminating Ward 8 altogether. And I think that the committee should consider both the ideas suggested here about having some at-large reps or maybe going back to 2 councilors with, I don't know, larger wards. I'm not really sure, but I hope that the problematic Ward 8 situation is resolved. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to switch to the room now. Dave Hartnett is up, and then we'll go to you, Erhard. And I also see there's another hand up too. Anyone else in the room?
Hi, I'm Dave Hartnett from Ward 4. I'd really like to talk about the process a little bit, and particularly in the format where we showed the slide where there were steps in the format, where this step is going on now, which is our work that we're doing, right? And it's really going out. We have a big survey that's been well worked on, and then we hand off this work to the city council. And I think that's where I'm concerned about where the disconnect might come in a little bit, because the city council doesn't have to take any of this information, right? They're going to hand it off. I've served on the council. I've been there before. The council's going to kind of, I hope they won't, but they have a tendency to do, because it's in their best interest when we talk about gerrymandering. What's best for the city council and what's best for the voters are two different things. And to me, there's not a lot of teeth in this resolution as far as holding the council accountable from our public input that we're going to get. We're going to hand it to them and we're going to hope that they listen. But they could choose not to. They could go in a whole different direction. And I'm worried that that could happen. I hope it doesn't happen. And so I think part of the work on this committee should be going forward is to have conversations with the council to make sure that all this work that we're doing is for naught, right? I hope that's not the case, right? You guys are going to spend many hours getting input from many people, working on surveys that have been done. And I'm in hopes that the council will respect the work of this committee, listen to the people, and although they may not like it, all right, accept the work that this committee has done and hopefully use the information they get and take the recommendations. Quickly, I am also not for at-large councilors in the city. I am for 7 wards and 2 councilors in each ward for 14 councilors. I think Barb from Ward 6 presented a map. The last time we met, I looked at that map. I liked that map. I think it was well done. But I think at-large councilors, previous to the other speaker, city council races are not party-driven, right? They're community-driven, with about maybe 10 to 15 people working on a campaign, hardly any party money involved. You go out and do your own fundraising. You get into at-large seats across the city, they're going to be expensive. The elitist will win. The person with the most money will win. And I think that will be unfortunate because that's not democracy, right? That's not city government. So I would hope we would stay away from at-large councilors. Thanks.
Thanks, Dave. Erhard, you're up next.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great, thanks. And thanks for folks who are volunteering to serve on the redistricting committee. Really appreciate your spending time on this. So I'm speaking from the vantage point of having been a Burlington resident since the mid-70s, and like Dave, have also served on the city council, though it's been quite a while back in the 80s. I guess my first point is I agree with Dave and Lee and others who've spoken, I think, pretty articulately against at-large districts. I think at-large districts would be a really serious mistake for many of the reasons that have already been provided. And one other one I'll just add is that at-large districts have definitely been shown in other areas to be really less representative and less democratic. Dave mentioned, and others mentioned that it would really fall to folks with big bucks. There would be more campaign money going in, and it would just and those folks would be really removed from the neighborhoods and representing neighborhoods. So the other thing that I would really like to see is I always thought that when we went to the district and ward system a few years back, that was really kind of one of those compromises that's forged by, a bad compromise forged by a number of different interests to kind of satisfy or maybe not satisfy everyone. I think the districts are, I like the purely ward system and would love to see us get rid of the districts, and also agree with the sentiments around 2 folks per ward wherever possible. And also, for all the reasons that folks have mentioned already, I mean, Ward 8 is just completely gerrymandered. It is really pretty undemocratic, and I would support the elimination of Ward 8 and combining it back, or combining most of it back into Ward 1. One thing that I'll throw out there, having served on a city council, it was very much like the one from 1990 to 2010. I really liked 13 people on the city council. I think sometimes, having even numbers really, causes difficulties because you don't have, you can have a split votes, and we've seen those happen, and it can result in some stalemate. We used to have 3 councilors from the New North End, so from a combination of wards 4 and 7. I'm not suggesting, and Lee actually kind of spoke to this because, even though she lives in Ward 4, she feels represented by all 3 of the New North End councilors. I do think that it would be good to go back to, if you're going to try and have 13 members, it might be good to have most wards have 2, and then create 1 larger ward that might have 3, or alternatively have a smaller ward that has just 1. So my vote would be to try and rejigger the map in a way that allows for 13 councilors. So I haven't done a lot of looking at the actual map, but to the extent that neighborhoods can be represented, I think you really should draw the line so that there's communities of interest and neighborhoods are well represented. So thanks for the time, and thanks for hearing my comments.
Thanks, Gerhard. Up next, Christopher Aaron.
Yes, good evening. My name is Christopher Aaron Felker. I'm the chairman of the Burlington GOP, and I'm here today to speak on redistricting. I'd like to begin by saying that I too share many of the concerns that have been articulated this evening regarding gerrymandering and Ward 8. Not only does it make me feel uncomfortable, it just doesn't seem democratic like others have mentioned. From here, I'd like to move on to the current model that we have of 8 wards and 4 districts. And I'd like to speak to how the council and the city in general is attempting to take steps to ensure that we have more equitable representation in our government, and that we tear down barriers that tend to impede or obstruct individuals of diversity from running for office. One of these obstructions is the 4-district system. A much larger area to cover undoubtedly requires almost twice the amount of money to campaign and reach and connect with voters on your messaging. And as such, I think that it is a relic that is a failed experiment. I think that what would be best in the best interest of Burlingtonians and our city as a whole would be to switch back to the 7 ward with 2 councilors per ward model. This, as already mentioned by some other great people this evening, allows for neighborhoods and wards to have even 2 councilors of potentially both different parties that come together to represent that community. That's representation in action. That's our democracy in action. That is ensuring that voices of not just the majority, but everybody are being heard in our government. And it also serves to tear down those barriers so that way people of different backgrounds and our new Americans in our community can actually run and achieve office and representation and service in our city. So I strongly encourage the people in charge of redistricting, and I echo Dave's sentiments earlier about how it's important that council really take this to heart and not just look out to preserving the incumbents' best interest. It is about the best interests of our city, preserving and promoting democracy in our city, and allowing for full representation and equal access. And I strongly believe and encourage everybody that we should move back towards the 7-ward with 2 councilor model. Thank you.
Thank you. Up next is Evan. Bye.
Hello, good evening. I'm going to try to turn my camera on, but I'm having some bandwidth problems.
It looks good now. Okay.
Okay, thanks. So I don't have prepared remarks. I just really wanted to listen mostly to everybody who is here tonight. My name is Evan Litwin. I live in Ward 4 in the southernmost, I'm the southernmost neighbor of Ward 4. So for me, my concerns will lie in, you know, do I end up in Ward 3, or do I end up in Ward 4? What ends up happening? And one of the things that I'm thinking about is the diversity of my community. Ward 4 and 7 will ultimately have to change in some way, most likely. And the graph was very helpful to see for me that Ward 7 actually had, was likely going to need to grow. And so that made me think, well, how does Ward 7 grow? Maybe it grows into Ward 4, maybe it grows into Ward 3, and then Ward 3 would need to grow into Ward 1. So I wouldn't necessarily say that we have a bias of representation in the New North End, but that we'll have to consider what that looks like many different ways. Surprisingly, I would say I agree with pretty much everything that's been said tonight. And so I would just actually reiterate that I think that eliminating the district positions would be helpful, and returning back to a 2 representative system in the wards, I think would be great. One thing I've been concerned about as well is the workload that Lee just mentioned, the workload of our city councilors. It's a burden. It's a massive amount of work. And in terms of independents running, actually one of the big problems for independents who choose to run, they don't have access to the data that the parties actually offer. So if you declare yourself as a Democrat, you're going to have access to all their data, phone numbers, addresses, and so forth. And so when you're trying to campaign in the middle of winter and going door knocking, it's a huge burden for independent candidates. So if we want to see more independent candidates, we actually have to consider, are they having to cover too much ground? And then additionally, I would just say, I actually support the feedback around gerrymandering that's been offered. However, I guess as a Ward 4 resident, which is as far away from there as you could really get, I would defer more to residents in Wards 1 and 6 to see how they feel about how that would impact them should they have to absorb the dormitories of UVM into their wards. And additionally, one of the biggest concerns I have, and I thank, I think it was Keith Pillsbury who added quite a bit of interesting data at the very beginning of the meeting, is that it sounds like some candidates don't have access, the same level of access to others. And I'd be surprised if our city attorney didn't say that that was a big problem. So the other question I guess I would pose is, why 7 wards? And my worry is, I guess we don't want 20 city councilors. Maybe we do, maybe we don't. I don't know, but I know that it would be helpful for them to have more hands, because many hands make light work. And so they'd be able to divide themselves amongst these committees and kind of divide up work collaboratively and collegially. So I'll leave that there. But I guess I would just say, as somebody who lives on the front lines of 3 wards where 3 ward boundaries meet, and in a highly diverse community, I would be concerned that we would be then lumped into the Old North End. And then we would have a problem where we have a highly diverse neighborhood that's all been kind of put into one area. And so that for me raises representation questions, right? So food for thought, and I appreciate the time. Thanks.
Great, thanks so much, Evan. Is there anyone in the room who'd like to make a comment, question, suggestion? Okay, how about online? Is there anyone else? Hands up. Rama, do you see anyone's hands up that I don't see? Okay, so, yep, Sarah, would you like to, Sarah Carpenter, yep.
Sarah Carpenter, happen to be Ward 4 City Councilor, and I'm really not going to opine on this, but Attorney Dan Richardson brought up an interesting point, and I'm just going to toss it out there for pondering, which is we, the city, could amend our charter, which is a legislative process, so that next time we don't have to go to the legislature for approval. We could just do it by the voters. So as the committee is gathering thought on that, I'd actually like them to just ponder that question. One of our problems in the timing was meeting the charter change deadline. And if we could eliminate that and just have the voters decide next time, that might smooth the process.
Thank you, Sarah. And I see Bill Church, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. I'm sorry I joined late. I'm sure I'm just going to echo what has been said and some of what I've heard. I think 2 considerations need to be put into this. One is to increase the diversity of the wards. Perfect example of that is the student ward, Ward 8. I think the students would benefit from being parts of other wards where their voices could be multiplied instead of being stuck in one ward where they're somewhat peripheral to other meeting other groups of people in the city. The second thing I'd like to echo is that these wards should reflect the neighborhoods. My issues on Bradley Street are very much different than issues on other neighborhoods. And so if we could somehow co-localize people, and really I think it's important to the city because we've always been proud of our communities. And I think that one of the changes that's happened in the city in the 40 years I've lived here is the polarization and the fact that people don't seem to want to interact and work with each other anymore. And I think we need to push back against that. So I think you have a great opportunity. I appreciate everybody's help on this. And that's all for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else online or in the room? Okay, I think we're going to go on to our, there's a list of the considerations that we talked about earlier, and we have a little exercise in ranking that we're going to ask you all to participate in. And I'm going to hand it over to Megan to explain that.
Okay, so Diane has created an activity so that we can get everyone's direct feedback on each of the different considerations that if City Attorney Dan Richardson shared with us, and a lot of the things that have been discussed tonight. So I'm going to share my screen again. For those of you that are online or those of you that are in the room that just prefer to do this virtually, we have set up something that is called a Menti poll. So if you go to menti.com, that's MENTI.com. There is a code on the screen here, if you can see, if I'm sharing my screen appropriately. Rama, can you see my screen? No, I'm not sharing it. 1 second.
And for those of you who don't want to do it electronically, I have hard copies, so I'll hand those out.
You could read the number off.
There we go. We're on the screen now. So again, the website you can visit on a phone or a computer is MENTI.com. And there is a code then that you can enter on the screen that pops up for you. The code is 7537379. So there will be 2 questions here on the poll that you will be able to answer. that will help us get a sense from you about how you view these criteria in order of importance. You can rank each of these criteria from 1 to 5, with 1 being the least important and 5 being the most important for you. I'm actually going to switch and start sharing the actual poll so that as you all are voting virtually, we can see your voices come in. And there are also folks in the room that are voting on paper if they prefer. They're doing the same exercise just on a piece of paper. Yes, Jeff?
My screen has a whole list of questions rather than just the first 2. Oh, okay, keep going.
Yes, so there should be the first slide here. The first set of questions are about the considerations about how we divide up the number of counselors or the council seats. So these are things like, would you like to keep the current number of wards? Would you like to keep districts in addition to wards? Would you like to preserve incumbency? You can vote for each one of them. And then in just a second, we'll move on to a question about how to draw the boundaries.
But if you're anxious, they can keep going.
I think so. You should be able to. So far, we have about, it looks like 12 people that have entered their preferences online. And it definitely looks like we're hearing a reiteration of the comments we heard about having multiple representatives in wards. That is ranking highly. Yes, so the numbers, these little dots that you see as everyone is voting, it represents an average score. So as everyone is ranking this 1 through 5, this represents an average. So it looks like at an average score of 4, having multiple representatives per ward is one of the most important criteria of those that are voting tonight. Where at an average score of 1.4, keeping districts in addition to wards is one of the least important criteria to those that are voting tonight.
We'll get a report.
Yes, the committee will be provided with a report for everybody that is voting and how they rank each of these criteria.
We can probably post it on the website too.
My choices kept jumping around without me changing them. Is anybody else experiencing that?
That's the way it works. As people put their.
No, I had no problem.
So we definitely are seeing the little dots bounce around as everyone is voting because it's averaging everybody's input. So we're kind of seeing the result of everybody participating together.
And how many people?
Right now we have 21 people that have voted on this. All right, so I think we'll wrap this question and we'll move on to the next one.
Is this what people expected to see based on what we heard?
Sorry, Diane asked if this is what you all were expecting to see based on the comments you heard.
Nothing surprising.
Yeah.
Okay, nothing surprising. All right, so same exercise here. These are 5 different criteria that relate to how the boundaries of wards could be drawn. So again, ranking them from 1 being the least important to 5 being the most important.
I'm sorry, this is Earhart. I'm having real difficulty. I do not understand how this is supposed to work. Try to do this on my phone and it does not.
Oh, you're doing it on your phone?
Essentially, you would just kind of, are you able to slide the button?
I mean, I touch the screen and it creates all these lines on the screen. Sorry, maybe I just won't participate.
Oh, Earhart, we can actually see the lines, the red lines. I wondered who drew those. It looks like you may have a Zoom setting that's turned on. So you're doing something in Zoom instead of on the poll, maybe.
Yeah, I just won't participate.
And we can, this will actually be open through tomorrow. So we can, you can participate later if you want on a computer when you have access to a computer.
Thanks.
Okay, so far we have about 11 looks like 11 people have submitted their thoughts on how to draw boundaries. Right now, it looks like minimizing the population differences between the wards is one of the higher ranked criteria here at an average score of 4.1. We're also seeing a lot of folks indicating that keeping neighborhoods and geographic areas intact is a highly ranked criteria, which again, I think is what we were hearing in the room at an average score of 3.9. And also reflecting comments we heard, keeping the student population in a single ward is one of the lower ranked criteria at an average score of 1.2. All right, and it looks like we also have 21 folks who have voted there. So the same number that voted in the last question. So again, this will be open for the next, 48 hours. And if you would like to vote or send this to anybody that would like to vote, feel free to pass it along to your friends and neighbors and they can contribute as well.
Quick question. Sorry, Megan, where's this going to be posted?
So the slides from tonight's presentation will be posted online, but the same link, menti.com, and that 9-digit code will be the same way that you can access this website after this meeting. So we'll make sure that it's posted on the CEDO website.
Thank you.
No. Okay, so it's not the same as the slides from the last meeting, just so you don't go look. Make sure you look for tonight's slides, okay, to be sure. All right, so that was what we all had planned for the evening, but we are happy to stay here. And if there are more people who want to make comments or express concerns, we're happy to do that. We'll tell you what's up next. We have one more listening session. This is our second of 3, and we'll be doing that on December 6th. What's the date? You guys know, I have it written down. Wait, I'll find it. I apologize. I'm sorry, we're meeting on, yes, December 6th. We're going to be at Champlain College's Miller building, which is on Lakeside. And we'll be doing the same session that we did tonight. So yeah, another Miller Center. I know it's confusing. December 15th, we were going to have a ad hoc committee meeting. We're going to talk about what we've heard, have a recap, and then we will move our memo to the city council, and that will be presented to them at likely the end of January. That's our schedule right now. So those are our next steps. We're taking public comment in addition to the meetings, also through CEDO. So you can feel free to send any written comments to them. They'll be compiling them and getting them ready for the committee to review. So any other last minute? Yes, we do. We have Evan, did you want to?
Yeah, is
Yes,
Attorney Richardson still in the Miller Center?
He is not, I'm sorry to say.
Okay, I would just be curious, and maybe other people would too, if we could get maybe his read on a lot of comments tonight and allegations of gerrymandering around Ward 8. And so I would be, and some comments about arguments about why that's gerrymandering and not allowing access, for example, to campus creates a problem for certain candidates. And I would have been very curious to hear his legal read on that.
We'll see if I'll see if I can follow up with him, and we'll put something in the meeting notes.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Barbara.
Hi, everybody. I think that we really need to be open-minded about the shape and the length of wards, because the city is sort of elongated along the lake, and it has an odd shape also along the Winooski River. And every time we do this exercise, Ward 7 ends up being too small compared to the other wards. And so I think it's worthwhile to be thinking out of the box about how Ward 7 is shaped. And maybe it should be including the Intervale and some of the Old North End, where there's a ravine that separates part of the Old North End down near the river. So those people would still be together in their neighborhood. They wouldn't be parsed away from who they think their community may be. At least, I don't know, that should be explored with them. But it would go a long way towards, in the future, not having Ward 7 always be too small. And likewise, Ward 4, I think, could extend further down the lake and include the whole bike path area, because there's a common theme there, and that's the bike path issues, you know, with traffic and bikes intersecting, and use of marinas and that type of thing. So I think part of this survey has to also be looking at what are the common issues in neighborhoods, not just at geographic boundaries. People want to be with people who share the same issues and concerns. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Barbara. Lee. Lee, you're muted.
Thanks. Erhard's remarks about wards, even number of counselors and odd number. A 6-6 vote, which is a tie vote, is a no vote. It isn't a gridlock, it's a no vote. It takes 8 votes to get to yes. And Burlington does things this way. You'll notice that we've got 2 bond issues coming up on the ballot. One of them is a GO bond, a general obligation bond that requires 60% to get to yes. 63%. Where's Robert? 2/3. It takes a 2/3 vote to get to yes. Burlington likes to make it a little harder to get to yes than to get to no. And no. And I've lived here for a long time. And one of the things about Ward 4 and 7 that people don't seem to realize is Ward 4 and 7 used to be, right now we're split by the avenue, but we used to be one ward with the people in Killarney Drive in the same voting district as the people in Village Green. And so an easy way to manipulate the numbers of Ward 4 and Ward 7 is to move some of Ward 7 into Ward 4. You can equalize Wards 4 and 7 that way. And we've done that traditionally over the years. People in Wards 4 and Ward 7 don't really feel like they have different interests, because we have the shopping center, which brings everybody together, and we have the Miller Center, which brings everybody together, and we have the Heineberg Senior Center, which brings everybody together. And so the fluctuation of boundaries between Wards 4 and Ward 7 is pretty easy to do. And I also really enjoyed when we talked about how we really don't vote strongly by parties in Wards 4 and Ward 7. I love agreeing with Christopher. Christopher and I agree on this, and I just love it. And we're different parties. There's a lot of that commonality in Wards 4 and Ward 7. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that we've had 2 counselors per ward, and that they work together collaboratively and collegially. Somebody used those words. I thought that was really great. I think it was Erhard who mentioned we could have larger wards and smaller wards and have a larger ward with 3 districts. Well, folks, that isn't equal representation. You have to have, your voting districts have to be largely equalized.
Okay, thank you, Lee. Erhard, you're up next.
Well, yeah, I couldn't resist the bait, Lee. I was actually thinking about hearkening back to when Wards 4 and 7 were Ward 4, and you all had 3 folks. It may not work with equal representation. That is true, but that was not a bad system. And it sounded to me like you were actually thinking that the same. So that was kind of what I was thinking in some of my comments before, in terms of a potentially larger ward. Because what you have right now is a large and a small ward. You have Ward 7, and you've got Ward 4. So.
Okay, thank you, Erhard. Anyone else online? I don't see any hands up. We have somebody in the room. George.
Hi, Greg Shepler, part of the Redistricting Committee, Ward 5. I just want to thank all the Zoom participants. I know we had a little difficult time getting started here, but you were persistent, and it was great for committee members. I'm just speaking on behalf of myself, but I'm sure that others feel the same way, to hear from the public. That's part of our charge, but we haven't really heard a lot from the public until tonight. So really appreciate your efforts to enlighten us.
Thanks, Greg. Rama, do you want to say anything in our sum up?
Actually, I just wanted to ask if we could get some guidance from the city attorney about if we did have a larger, excuse me, a larger ward with 3 representatives. So if it was 1.5 times as big in population and had 3 representatives, would that comply with the requirements for equality? It seems to me that it should. I mean, you still have the same number of representatives per person, but that would be something we'd want to get some feedback from Dan about.
And unfortunately, Dan's already left, but I will keep that question and we'll ask him to give us an answer on that. Okay?
Could we,
Thank you.
We have one more person here, just 1 second, Lee. Yep.
could we talk about the survey?
Yeah. I don't know.
Okay.
Let's.
So I'm Robert Bristow Johnson. I'm the Ward 7 representative on the committee. And I just want to give you some technical information that has about what we were talking about. So before 1990, there was a 13 ward map, and there was no Ward 7. Ward 4 was most of the entire New North End, and it had 3 councilors. And on 1 year, 1 councilor was up for re-election, and on the other year, 2 councilors were up for re-election, and it was the top 2 vote getters win. So that ward had a different system than none of the other wards had. None of the other wards had a multi-winner election on the odd year. And when that was proposed in 2013, that ran up against a block up here in the New North End. Nobody seemed to like it up in the New North End. The other option was either Ward 4 or Ward 7 would continue to be a 2-councilor ward, and then the other one map had Ward 4 being a single councilor ward of half the population, and another one had Ward 7 along Plattsburgh Avenue being a single councilor ward. And that problem with that, as viewed by some, was that the people in that half ward, that smaller ward, they did not get to weigh in on city council every year like everybody else in the city. Everybody else in the city got to weigh in on the content of city council, except for that one ward that would have only 1 representative in with a 2-year term. And so one of the things that was important 8 years ago was that the same, not just the population equality, which was required by a law and the Constitution, but that the same rules applied, that we had the same structure for each ward, instead of a different structure for one ward, and then the rest of the city having another structure that might have been considered less onerous. And so I would like you to consider that. Now, I want to also say something about 7 wards of equal population. Even before the 2014 map, Ward 7 extended down into Lakeview Terrace. Part of the old North End was in Ward 7. I'm going to tell you a little story about an election that happened in there. It was around, I don't know, 2009 maybe, where a candidate named Eli Lesher Goldsmith, who lived in Lakeview Terrace, was running for Ward 7 councilor, and his opponent said that one of his campaign points was that a councilor for Ward 7 must really be from the New North End, and that the Lakeview Terrace, we didn't want to have a councilor from Lakeview Terrace because it wasn't New North End, and that I objected to that. I felt that, if a person lives in Ward 7, he's just as eligible as anybody else who lives in Ward 7. But there was an issue about the old North End being attached to a new North End ward that some people didn't like. And if we had stayed with 7 wards 8 years ago, we would have had to expand further into the old North End, namely Convent Square, Manhattan Drive, Washington Street, even farther, but probably all the way down to North Street. And that is certainly the case this time. It turns out from Ward 4 and 7 together at the moment, the North District is still within 5% of being exactly 1/4 of the city. So it is still possible from the point of view of numbers. We would not be overrepresented in the North End. In terms of numbers, Wards 4 and Ward 7 can still be an equal population in the current scheme. It might not be the way for us to proceed, but I'm just saying that if we go to 7 wards or 6 wards or 9 wards, it is unavoidable that a part of the old North End will be attached to a part of the new North End in a single ward. That cannot be avoided. It can only be avoided with a 4-ward map or an 8-ward map or a 12-ward map.
Thank you, Robert. And I think, Lee, thank you for reminding me about the survey. I think George is going to give us a little update about where they're at.
Hi, so for those of you who have been paying attention since the beginning, the subcommittee or working group on the survey has been a bit of a roller coaster. Started out with Chris, who was removed from the committee because of a prior position on the school board. So I just want to thank everyone for their patience on getting this survey completed. What I have decided to do after receiving conflicting feedback from fellow committee members is to propose 3 ways to move forward. One would be the full survey as is, which I've added some language that's capitalized in there, asking folks to prioritize just the last few questions, which would be an open response and a ranking of priorities. Another option would be to simply remove the majority of the survey and just leave that priority ranking and open response. And another option would be that some folks on the more extreme end have suggested that because this survey would be imperfect, that maybe the data would be misleading and that it should be just canned altogether. So I've asked the voting committee members to vote on that after they review the current version of the survey. And then I'm going to just move forward with whatever that decision is.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? I think we do have, Anne, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I have a question for George. So are you going to be emailing us a copy of the revised survey, or is that right on the Google Docs already?
It's both. I just sent out an email.
Okay, thanks.
I don't see any more hands up. And anyone else in the room? Okay, I think our meeting is adjourned for the evening. Thank you all so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. I'm sorry, am I hearing someone?
What was the decision on the survey?
Oh, I don't know. I think the committee needs to discuss that. Is that what you said, George? I'm sorry, I missed that.
When?
Okay, one sec. He's going to come to the microphone.
I mean, we're here now. Why don't we vote on it right now?
Well, I was going to give folks a chance to review the current version, but if that's a possibility, I would like to move forward as quickly as possible.
Is everyone here? I don't know if folks left. Do we have a sense of that?
I mean, the deadline for Diane's paper is the 15th. And so, yes, we should move forward on it quickly. How many committee members are here? We need 6 people or 5 people.
Okay. Yeah, and I mean, the other option also, if you do want more time, if folks want more time, we can always put the information together from the survey and get it to the council separately. It doesn't, I think in the ideal world, we put it all together at once, but if we just need more time, that's okay too. So it's really up to you all on what you're most comfortable with. And, George, you've been spearheading this, so I would leave it up to you to tell us what works for you.
Yeah, the beginning of this email states that I'm hoping that this is my last duty as a subcommittee member for the redistricting survey. And yeah, as soon as those emails, those votes came in, then I would consider it done. And I think that can be done either right now if people have access to that, or within the next 24 hours, I think is pretty reasonable. And then I guess the next step would be to hand that off to CEDO and get that into the issue of community news, and also ask each committee member to post the survey link on their front porch forum and distribute it as they see fit.
Okay, do you want me to run through the committee members and see if folks want to decide? Oh, you have Jim, yeah? Jim, Greg, you have things you want to discuss? Please.
Did I hear whether or not this survey is going in the community news?
We're processing the question. I think what I wanted to do was pose a question for us to vote on,
okay.
Which is we can understand it's not going to be a perfect survey, but it's rare that you ever have a perfect survey. So I would propose that we don't allow that question. That it's valuable data. The other is the survey in its long form is probably so long that you reduce the chance of participation. So I would propose that we accept the imperfections of it, understanding, and then do the shortened version with the priority, because then it's essentially a very similar data set as you're doing through Menti and through the survey, and therefore you've got more data of very similar data points. So of all possibilities, it is the best, it would seem to me to be the best approach to getting useful data that's consistent. So my proposal would be that of the three options George suggested, that we go with the ranked choices and open-ended, and then get that out as soon as possible. And to do that all before the deadline for the community news, so we can get it in there. So if we could vote tonight, then we can go forward and get that in the paper.
Okay, so do I have this correct? Move forward with the short version of the survey, is that right?
So, and get it in the paper.
And get it in the paper, yep, get it in community news. Okay, does anybody want to discuss that anymore, online, or it looks like Gerhard, you have your hand up?
It's just, Diane, thank you. I don't mean to distract from the committee's discussion, but I'm looking at the committee's website, and I'm not seeing the survey there. Is that going to be?
No, I don't think it's up yet. No, it's not up
okay.
yet. Yeah.
Got it. So return tomorrow or something?
Well, we're gonna vote. So if we decide to go forward, we will distribute it, absolutely, yes.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Anybody else on the committee want to say anything before we run through the roll? Okay, yep, go ahead, Greg.
In looking at the survey, I'm fine with the way it is, except I'm still concerned about the information about you. And I understand the importance of getting sort of cross-representation. I think that is important in the demographics in the survey. I just think that it might turn people off if it appears at the beginning of the survey. And so if we could possibly move that information to the end of the survey, and then people still have filled out some of the information that's going to be helpful to the committee, and then they can decide whether or not they want to answer the information about themselves.
Okay, so that's the demographic information, right? Okay, so the proposal is to move that to the end of the survey. Greg, do you have issues with that? Or maybe, sure, go ahead.
I agree.
Agreed?
Okay, so would that be the longer version or the shorter?
Oh, I thought we were voting on the shorter version.
Okay. So could we have two votes or?
Just pick one and then
Yeah.
let's-
know the opposite of what.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna pick, so we're back to the short version, and getting it in the community news. That's what we're voting on. Is that clear to everyone?
Okay, and is everyone all right with just throwing out the third option of getting rid of the survey completely then?
Is there anybody who
It's
is,
just long or short, long being moving demographic questions to the end?
is there anybody who does not want to do the survey? Okay, so we're actually voting on both the short and the long, or let's go on the short first. Let's go on the short, okay. So let's say if you're in favor of voting of the short version of the survey, okay? Everybody clear on that? Okay, so Richard Hilliard. Yay? George Love?
Nay, long version.
No, Daniel? Is that right? Daniel?
He's off,
Nope.
and so is
And Jim Holder? Short? Yes. Greg Shepler?
Short.
Short, yes. Robert?
Short.
Yes. Rama?
We didn't hear you, Rama.
I think you're muted.
Yeah, short, yes.
Yep, yay. And that's, so is anybody in? No, okay. So it looks like that passes by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to 1. Move forward. Good? Is that what you need, George?
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic.
What was the 5? What was the vote? I couldn't hear it.
To vote for the short version. And
Yeah, so there will be a 2-question survey, which I can pass along to Cito.
Yeah.
Yep, okay, that's what I'll do.
And what are the 2 questions on the survey?
Rank your top 5 priorities for what to prioritize in the redistricting process, and an open response question.
So our charge to ask people whether they want district and ward and how many councilors per ward and how many wards, we're just leaving that out?
Some of that is touched upon in the ranking of priorities, but yes, a lot of the other ranking, the other feedback is going to be forgone for the with the logic that more people will answer.
Well, George, you did a terrific job. You really did a terrific job. And I'm sorry that it didn't come together the way you hoped, but you really did a beautiful job with that survey.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Lee.
Thanks. All right, everyone. Thank you all so much for coming out. We appreciate it. Yes. Oh, wait, one more, Richard. Yes.
Can I just ask one thing of the city?
Sure.
We hear each committee member should be posting on Front Porch Forum. Shouldn't the city be posting on Front Porch Forum so that there's a consistency across the city? All I hear from CEDO is no, but Brian Pine seems to
CEDO
suggest
has posted. I know that they sent out a message about your first meeting, which obviously included the wrong link. But this meeting was included in a citywide Front Porch Forum that CEDO sent out, and I think your meeting on December 6th was also.
But what about the survey?
Oh, if you can get the survey to CEDO, I would imagine that they could include a link to that if they have another posting going out.
I would have thought that you would want uniformity across the city.
He's saying post the survey that we just agreed to.
Yeah.
That the city does the posting to Front Porch Forum as well as the community paper.
Yep, I understand. I think if the link can be provided, I personally haven't seen the survey at all. So if we make sure that somebody from CEDO gets that, if they have another posting that's going out about this process, we can make sure to include the link for you. Yep. Okay.
Hi, this is Ethan from CEDO, by the way, and I just want to reiterate that all the presentations and information can be found on the city website, and you can always check it out there, all the updated agendas and meeting times and everything, and this survey will also be posted there.
Thank you, Ethan. Okay, Diane said that we should say goodnight. So thank you to everyone who zoomed into this meeting. The Miller Center will be signing off. Have a great evening.
Right.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for staying to the end.
Yeah, is this where the people?
Recording stopped.
You get as much